quality should be so important to your business ecosystem. So if you think about what you do as a consumer products manufacturer and the way that you make money in your business, it can be really depicted, I think, pretty easily like this. This is a simplistic representation, but I think a good one. You know, at the beginning, you need to think about bringing new products to the marketplace, right? So you have an innovation agenda. You know, it's the world of consumer products is a fast-moving space. If you're not innovating, if you're not moving ahead, you're probably falling behind. So item number one, I'm sure, is how do we get new products to the market that are going to be interesting to the consumers, and they're going to want to buy our products so that we can gain share in whatever categories that we play in. Now, the way that you go to market, Mr. CPG manufacturer, is for the most part, you don't actually sell to the end consumer. You sell to these wonderful people called retailers, all right? And that's an interesting process because as you're competing within the aisle in that supermarket for shelf space, and that's what you do, right? You're trying to justify why your product is on the shelf instead of somebody else's product. You have to be able to take the retailer to a different level of conversation to explain the value proposition for your product in the consumer marketplace. And there's a lot implied in being able to successfully have that conversation. Then you work together as a partner with the retailer to make sure that the shopper, the consumer themselves, is activated to buy your product. So what is the motivation that's going to cause Ben Skinner to walk into the salty snack aisle and pick up that bag of Fritos versus picking up some other brand? What is it that's going to motivate his behavior to do that? So we obviously have the end shopper in mind as we're thinking about this. And then you have the additional dimension, since you're a global organization, of you need to be thinking about how you do this in an evolving landscape. It's not only an evolving geographic landscape where you're trying to sell into new geographic markets, maybe large growth in the emerging world, but you also have to think about the emerging market of the different distribution channels and the way that people buy things today versus maybe they bought things 10 years ago, the types of influences that they have in terms of media versus maybe just running TV and radio ads 10 years ago. And then how all of that factors back in then to what our next wave of innovation needs to look like. So this is a continuous loop. This is what decides whether you make money or lose money, gain share or lose share in the consumer product space. All right, so how does quality factor into all of this, right? Well, it factors in a lot more places than maybe you would think meet the eye initially. If you think about innovation, the key to innovation is once you have a great idea, it doesn't do any good for you to have that great idea sitting back in the development lab. You have to get it to market. And the faster you get it to market, you get there before somebody else, you win. The first mover in any given category, if you were the first person to come out with Greek yogurt, guess what? You won, right? You gain that share, and then everybody else is trying to catch up to you, right? If you think about how many new products you come out with on an annual basis, if you could speed that innovation cycle up by 10 or 20 or 30%, get that product out there more quickly, you win. Well, one of the things that I'm sure is a long lead time item in your innovation cycle is making sure that you're building into your product that you're introducing to the marketplace, a brand new product you've never made before. How are we making sure we're delivering that with quality? That's very important. When you think about your relationship with the retailers, the one thing that we all understand about retailers is they work on very tight margins. And it doesn't matter whether you're the consumer products manufacturer trying to justify the premium brand at premium pricing in the store, the national brand, or even a regional or store brand. You've got different price strata that these retailers are going to force you into, and you better be able to control your cost because they are sure going to control what price they're willing to pay to you. And so if you've got an inefficient organization that can't get product efficiently in the marketplace, you're not going to make any money because these guys aren't going to let you do that. The other thing that the retailer is going to hammer you on is if you can't get that product to the shelf because you have quality problems, right? And we had one recent example that I'm familiar with where we had a dairy manufacturer come out with a very new innovative line of product, just was going to set the marketplace on fire, won a huge national contract with the largest convenience store chain in the country, and then guess what? Major quality problems, could not get the product to marketplace. So all of those big, yay, we won the deal, et cetera, none of it came to fruition because they couldn't deliver on their promises to the retailer. If you think about the shopper, it's pretty obvious. You have a brand. That brand is probably the most valuable asset that you have. It's worth a lot of money. It's worth a lot of money in the eyes of the shopper. They're willing to pay a premium for your product. If you do anything that harms the value of that brand, in the eyes of the shopper, that's money that you'll have a hard time clawing back, and that may be a relationship that you're never able to restore. So a lot of money there, and part of what goes into that then is thinking about the people actually making your product. In a lot of industries, a lot of that end product manufacturing is actually made by people outside your firewall. So if, for example, you are a beverage manufacturer for Coca-Cola or PepsiCo, the person that's actually making your end product and shipping it to your customers doesn't work for you. It's called a bottler, okay? So you need to think about how that supply network is affecting your brand relationship with your customer. And then at the end, you're no longer a regional company. You can no longer afford to operate one way in this location, a different way in this location, a different way in this location. You need to think about this being a global opportunity that you have to solve, and how do you do that consistently around the world. So in our view, quality management really comes into play in a lot of different areas, but all of it's geared towards making sure that we're driving maximum revenue for you with your customers and your consumers, and doing it in the most efficient way possible. Okay? So that sounds pretty easy. How do we do that? So here's the challenge that we think you probably have, and that we've observed in the marketplace. So the world used to be relatively simple. You had a company called yourself, and you made products to satisfy your customers, okay? Now the question is, if you're a large enterprise like you are with 26 different sites, do you consistently make that product the same way across all of your locations? What are the processes that you have in place that ensure that you're able to do that? So from a quality management standpoint, the first question is, if you look at some of the major core processes in quality management, things like CAPAs, change control, deviations, etc., do you have this scenario going on inside your company where you've got 3 different locations running 3 different CAPA processes, 3 different change control processes, 3 different deviation processes? The question is, if you're doing that, how can you ensure that you are actually delivering that same level of quality to the customer wherever they may be? So step number 1, if you haven't done it yet, is to think about process harmonization across your enterprise, and we can certainly help you with that, okay? Now, if the problem was that simple, that's a big enough problem by itself. The problem is you've got these people over there in procurement and finance, and they're always beating on you guys. We need to save money. We've got to cut costs. We can't be a vertically integrated company anymore. We need to do the things that we do well and outsource the things that we don't think are strategic to the business, right? So hopefully what that brings you is a lower cost base, more flexibility to go to market, et cetera, et cetera. However, the challenge that comes with that is now you suddenly have an extended ecosystem that you're having to do with. All of this is not being done inside your own 4 walls anymore. They're being done by contract manufacturers, packagers, suppliers, etc. And the question then becomes, same question we asked over here, do we have visibility to ensure that those organizations are following standard, consistent processes as well as you are, okay? And we'll talk about some statistics a little bit later that talk about where the source of a lot of inequality problems come from. A lot of them we're finding come from this phenomena of supply chain and sourcing this out into this ecosystem. Now here's the really scary part. If that wasn't scary enough, think about this. So you send a product ultimately out to your consumer with his child and dog out here on this end, and they've got Facebook and all kinds of cool things that they use to communicate with their friends and so forth, and Wall Street likes to understand all this stuff, etc. And as I count the number of manufacturing plants that you have in your supplier ecosystem and everything else, by my math, there's about 30,000 people in that ecosystem that touch your product that are involved or should be involved in your quality processes. So you have 30,000 points of failure for that little girl picking up that bottle of Pepsi and not tasting so good. So the question is, how do you control that? Well, you don't control that without actually having a pretty solid infrastructure in place to make sure that all of those people in that entire ecosystem are doing what they're supposed to be doing every time, every day, every week, okay? Now, that wouldn't be so bad if you didn't have these other nasty folks up there at the top that are looking at you from the standpoint of, we're trying to make sure that you're actually complying with the regulatory requirements that are in the marketplace. And we all know that that standard that's being applied to you as a food manufacturer, as a beverage manufacturer, is not getting less as time goes on. It's getting to be more and more and more. And guess what? They're doing it on a global basis. So what you might have been expected to be able to do in certain parts of the world and so forth, 5, 10 years ago, can't do it today, right? This is being viewed as one holistic thing. All right, so when you think about that, and you think about what the cost impact is to your organization, it's the old thing that if you can catch it back where it originally happens and stop it there before it gets into the supply chain, you can probably minimize the damage that occurs, right? But as the product moves out into the marketplace, especially once it gets out here in the hands of the consumer, and it gets into Facebook, and it gets out into the financial press, and so forth and so on, that can cost a lot of money, okay? So the challenge is, are you giving away all of the savings that you thought you were negotiating by outsourcing and everything else, and you're just handing those savings over in terms of poor cost of quality as you get out here into the supply chain, and it's really not delivering the benefits that you would originally thought. That's the challenge that we see people having day after day after day, okay? So here's the good news. We think we can help you address that challenge. Now, if you think about the way that most organizations have tried to do that, is they've grown up with having different point solutions in place for quality. So if you think about that map that I just drew, maybe there was a point solution over here in this plant and a different one over here. Maybe this division had their own capability that did a few things, but not everything they needed to do. Maybe the suppliers don't have anything, etc. And like a lot of organizations, you grew up through merger and acquisitions. You acquired different capabilities as time went on. So you wound up with this thing that I like to call the QDOTs, which are isolated capabilities for quality management spread throughout the enterprise, maybe buried within an ERP system or something like that. What we see happening with world-class organizations is really a change in thinking about how to address this problem, and really viewing this thing that we call enterprise quality management as a pillar solution. So you have other pillar solutions that you may have in place. Probably the foundation that you have underneath those pillars is an ERP platform. That's your system of record for transactions and orders and things like that. But built on top of that foundation are these pillar capabilities, things like PLM and MES and so forth. And we think enterprise quality management is evolving and has evolved as one of those pillar solutions. And the thing that makes EQMS a little bit interesting in comparison to some of the other solutions is the nature of it. It's designed to be geared around processes versus transactions. So when you start thinking about the interaction that this solution would have with other pillar solutions, it's able to connect all of these processes together into one seamless flow. So when you look at that then and think about what the end game is, and I like to think about it from the standpoint of 3 different dimensions, as you start putting this platform in place, you can start thinking about bringing all of those disparate processes into place in one location. You can start thinking about all the different organizations that probably need to be involved in those processes, manufacturing, R&D, et cetera, all into that single platform. And then you can start thinking about all the different dimensions of your global organization in terms of that as well. So let's get all the different locations, all the different divisions, et cetera, harmonized into one platform solution that then starts to deliver some of the value and some of the benefits that you would hope to see to address some of the challenges that we talked about, okay? So, the good news is, you're talking to people today that have done this more than anybody else in the world, okay? So we've got hundreds of implementations of this type of solution across some of the very largest corporations in the world, with well over 500,000 people that use our solutions on a daily basis. And as we go through the later presentations, we'll be taking you through some of the details of our different solutions that we bring and how they address some of the specific problems that we're talking about, okay? So, the good news also is you're not the first person to do this. So, we've got some very relevant examples, as you can see here on the slide, of organizations that are in your industry. And when you start thinking about things like the consumer products industry, having folks like Procter & Gamble, for example, that has rolled this out on a global basis to well over 100 sites around the world, implementing process after process, hopefully speaks pretty well for the types of leading edge companies that we're doing business with. And so we've got multiple examples of innovative consumer products companies. The other thing to think about is other industries have similar problems to this. And so from a scaling standpoint, we've implemented literally the largest quality management systems in the world at places like Novartis, at Pfizer, and also when you start thinking about the complexity of supply chain, which may be an issue in your organization given some of the different products that you make, when you start looking at the variety of different things from pharmaceuticals to industrial equipment to medical device, it's a very flexible solution that can address a lot of different business challenges across a lot of different problem sets. Now, the other thing that we typically get into in any kind of conversation with a potential new customer like yourselves is, where are you starting from and where do you want to go, okay? And the good news is we've pretty much seen every single one of these examples multiple times, where we can take you from where you are to where you want to be and take you through the logical pace and cadence to get you up that curve of sophistication. So, you know, a lot of organizations may be in the world where I think you are, which is you've got point solutions like I just described, they're semi-manual type of capabilities, and you aspire to get to more evolved capability. You know, as you start going up this curve of people that have implemented systems, maybe have done it on a divisional basis and haven't consistently harmonized, that's not an untypical scenario either. Where we see a lot of people aspiring to is to get this level 3, which is I want an integrated set of processes on a single platform. And that's a great goal, I think, for as we look to work with you over the next 2 or 3 years of getting you to that state of evolution. The good news is we can actually take you further than that, all the way to the end game that I described a few minutes ago, which is actually bringing your extended ecosystem into this capability as well, so that you now get a true end-to-end supply chain that's depicted within your EQMS. We are the experts at this, and we can help you. We've got a very robust capability from our services organization to help you map out your strategy to how to get you from where you are today to where you would aspire to be. Okay? All right, so what does this do for me? That's all fine and wonderful, but does this help me do something that's going to benefit my company and my shareholders? And actually it does a lot to help you. And we really think about this as having 4 major constituents at the table, okay? And I'm going to speak to each one of these. So if you think about the people that are usually the stakeholders in a decision process like this, you've obviously got your quality assurance, quality management team that's going to be at front and center on this. Obviously the IT organization, since it is a systems implementation, will be engaged. The supply chain and operations part of the business will receive a lot of benefit from doing this, and there's a big value proposition around that I want to talk to you about. And then ultimately all this rolls up to an executive responsibility that those stakeholders up in the C-suite have a responsibility to their shareholders and their board to make sure that they're doing the appropriate things to protect the value of the company and the value of the brand. So let's walk through each of these real briefly. So when you think about IT efficiency, as I just said, moving from a state where we've got lots of disparate systems and solutions in place, typically, and you've probably experienced this going through ERP implementations and other things, you know, when you have a lot of redundant hardware and systems sitting around, you also typically wind up with a bunch of redundant people supporting them because you've got overlap, right? We've got one system over here and another one over here. We're going to have subject matter experts on each one of those things and so forth. It's just not a very efficient way to operate from an IT standpoint. And what you wind up with is working with a lot of different vendors, and that adds an overhead from the standpoint of the type of support that you're typically paying to those solution providers, and it's not the optimal model by any stretch of the imagination. So when you think about what one of the key reasons to moving to an EQMS might be from an IT efficiency standpoint is once you put that platform in place and you start hanging more and more capabilities off of it, more and more processes embedded in it, and you can start eliminating all this redundancy out there in the organization, you wind up with a very efficient IT infrastructure. You wind up with the appropriate parts of the solution that need to be on-premise behind your firewall, the appropriate parts that need to be in the cloud. We can help you find that most efficient mix of those capabilities. And you get into a potential reallocation of resources, is what we've seen in other customer settings, where you can reallocate potentially from managing IT infrastructure into driving business value and working on those business levers that ultimately will cause the need for support and so forth from external parties, consultants, et cetera, hopefully be driven down over time. So we think there's a lot of different ways where IT efficiency really comes into play for the CIO and the people in his organization. Now, when you think about the quality operations group, let's pretend that you've got 100 people in your quality team that have been tasked with all of these different processes. And we've got a few of the core processes depicted here. So deviations, complaints, CAPAs, change management, et cetera, et cetera. And they've got a pool of work that they're having to do to manage, right? And so obviously you're not going to be able to go ask for an infinite amount of resources. You've got the resources that you can justify that are on the team. How do they manage this work? Well, one of the things that we've discovered as you implement these platform solutions, get everybody on the same electronic piece of paper, so to speak, is you can really, truly drive pretty significant cycle time reductions in these different processes. Now, as I said, we've done hundreds of implementations with thousands of users, so we've got a fairly good basis of work that we're, work experience that we're leveraging here. But typically, when we look at people compared to where the probably the best in class is and what their aspiration should be, as they move down this path, this evolutionary curve that I'm talking about, these are very, very typical examples that we would find and that probably you should expect to be able to see as you do this. So what's the benefit of reducing these cycle times like this, right? Well, first of all, you're working through problems much more quickly, so hopefully you're getting ahead of problems instead of reacting to them. But what you're also doing is you're now freeing up bandwidth for those 100 people to go do the things that you would really like them doing instead of responding to all this noise. So if we can take the noise out of the system, what could those people be doing for you, right? Well, if you do all these things, they probably become, based on our studies, anywhere from 20 to 35% more efficient, right? And if somebody suddenly said, hey, I'm going to go free up 20 to 35 of your people, what would you have them working on, right? Well, you'd have them working on getting ahead of the things that cost you money in your business. You'd have them out in front of the next recall situation. You'd have them out in front of trying to reduce scrap in your work in process inventory. You'd have them out in front of trying to battle those product non-conformance issues before they happen, right? And if you can start getting into a continuous improvement loop like that, the productivity that you're going to get out of your existing resources without having to go back to management to ask for more and more money, which they don't want to give you, can pay tremendous impact over here on the right side. It's not so much the cost of the 20 people that you're benefiting from, it's the cost of not having one more recall. Because that's worth tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars to you versus the cost of those 20 people. That's what you employed those people to do. And a system like this can help free them up from doing the mundane things to do the things that they're really good at. Okay? So let's talk about your supply chain. So relatively, simple depiction of what your supply chain looks like. But if you think about it, it really involves the movement of products, raw materials into your manufacturing operations or maybe your contract manufacturers, making those end products and then getting them out into your distribution network to that wonderful little family that we saw earlier. So when you think about all the places within that supply chain where quality costs you money, this is a relatively simple depiction of it. Obviously there's inventory scrap and waste that occurs everywhere within the system. And what typically happens is you start building up buffers, you start extending lead times for supply because you can't be assured that you're going to get the right thing the first time. And it just builds unnecessary waste and buffer into the organization. We had one customer that recently, a very well-known consumer products manufacturer, that recently justified their acquisition of TrackWise based upon a 1% savings per year in their scrap and waste inventory. And they typically have a little bit over 60 million a year in scrap and waste. And they said, if we can save 1% of that, that's $600,000. Okay, that's an easy justification for a product that you can implement as fast as this, right? And obviously their aspirations are to save more than 1%. But it's pretty compelling when you go through the math and you really look at where you're wasting money in your supply chain. The other thing that's absolutely critical here is when you start thinking about that cycle time reduction and how that factors into this as well. When you start thinking back to the innovation cycle that I was talking about earlier, I was speaking with one of our customers recently that's actually a retailer, and they make a lot of their products, over half of their products that are on the shelf of their stores are actually store brands or private label type of products. And the conversation there with their supply chain people was, we typically introduce about 1,000 new products per year out into the marketplace. And typically from inception to the shelf in front of the consumer, typically takes about 12 months on average. A lot of that process is working with our contract manufacturers because they make all of that stuff for us, back and forth, going through the product, release cycle, how do we innovate, how do we make this new thing, how do we do it right, we got to change this, got to change that. And he said, if we could take 1 month out of that 12-month cycle, think about it, that's 1,000 products that hit the shelf 1 month faster than they would have otherwise, and all of the revenue associated with those 1,000 products. All right? Our revenue just went up by 8% if you could do that for me. Okay? That's pretty compelling math, right? So when you think about that, and you think about where the effect of a enterprise quality management solution is in your supply chain, hopefully we're doing two things simultaneously. We're driving down the cost of that inventory waste, rework, scrap, etc. And then we're also driving up customer satisfaction and your revenue because we're getting the right product, the right shelf at the right time at the right cost, which is what the consumer wants. Okay? Okay, so what about those people upstairs on the 6th floor? What do they want? What are those executives looking for? Well, they've got a little bit more personal relationship to quality. Here's an example of one of those. There was an example in the last couple of years in the marketplace where there was a supplier distributed product that contaminated peanuts in it, and ultimately got into the food system. About 361 different companies used that product, or used that ingredient in almost 4,000 different products. So what happened? Well, some people got sick, some people got more than sick. The industry lost a lot of money. There was a 25% drop in peanut butter sales. Supplier filed bankruptcy, and some executives had some friendly people from the federal government show up to ask them a few questions. Not really what a senior executive wants to be dealing with up there on the 6th floor. So, there's plenty of examples. This is just one of them. This is a very, very real issue for the people that run this company. When you think about probably the most important asset that any consumer products company has is the value of their brand. So what is it that makes you walk into the store and say, yeah, I'm going to pay 50% more to buy that versus buying that? It's that logo, it's that brand that's on the wrapper, okay? And that's the number one responsibility that a lot of these executives have to their shareholders, is protecting and enhancing the value of that brand. So here's an example. Obviously an extremely well-known brand in the marketplace, one that's got a great global reputation historically, is Toyota, right? Organization, very healthy growth on an annual basis, one of the top 10 brands in the world. Valuation of about $30 billion is what's attributed to the brand itself. If you look at it over the last few years since the recession started, the survey of the top 100 brands globally, those brands have weathered the recession pretty well, right? Premium products, people are willing to pay for it, and those brands appreciated by 58%. If you look at the S&P 500 as another market measurement, the S&P 500 has gained 23% share or value during that same period of time. So these top brands are able to weather through these types of things and muscle through, unless you have something that happens that disturbs the value of your brand, which is unfortunately what happened to Toyota. Pre-recall, they had a brand sentiment survey reputation in the marketplace where they were viewed extremely highly, very, very positive, 83% positive brand recognition. Went through a first recall scenario, it dropped a little bit, but hey, everybody makes a mistake, no big deal. We'll be okay from that. Well, guess what? The second one happened, took a big plunge, right? So obviously this is not a one-off type of thing. This is a